I'm loading onto physical hardware. The machine that I'm loading onto is a Dell PowerEdge 2850. We'll be installing Windows Server 2008 R2 x64. And I'm doing the recording in such a way to allow me to zoom through things that take a little bit of time. This way we can get through the entire process and actually have more time for more demos. So I'm booting to a CD. In fact, there are no disks on this machine that are visible whenever I'm booting from CD, because I will need to install the driver. Accept the license agreement, do a custom installation, and I don't have any disks, so I need to go ahead and add the driver for that. I have that on a USB hard drive that's plugged into the machine. So it's going to install my Dell PERC 4E-/DI RAID controller. And now that it's got the RAID controller installed, I can see the partitions that are already set up on this machine. There are two partitions: the system partition, which is something that Server 2008 sets up, 2008 R2 and Windows 7, and my data volume. Now, the first thing that I've got to do is I'm going into the command prompt, and I've got to figure out what drive letter my data is on. So I'm just going to go through the drives until I find the one that I'm looking for, because depending on the number of drives that are in your system, it will depend on what drive letter it actually has. Now, in this case, the F drive, which is the unlocked drive, that's the USB drive that has my drivers on it, the 2850 drivers. The G drive is the system reserve drive. So that's not where I want it. So the next drive is the H drive. That should be my data volume, my data drive. And sure enough, it is. So this has my host C drive and the VHD folder. So if I go to the VHD folder, I see that there's no files in there. I can actually create a file there. And the way to do that is to use the disk part utility. Once disk part loads, I basically have to create the disk. The command to do that is create vdisk, and then the syntax is going to take a few parameters. The first one is file equals, and then the location that you want to create the file and the file name. So it'll be file equals h:\VHD /bootdemo.vhd, and then the next parameter is going to determine the type of drive that you're creating, and it can be either fixed or expandable. In our case, we're going to do expandable, so it's type equal expandable, and then maximum equal to 40,000, and it's going to give us about a 39 gig partition. The maximum is the maximum size for that VHD file, and it's successfully created that file. The next thing I have to do is attach it. Before I attach it, I just want to show a list of the virtual disk here, and note that that disk is selected. So whenever you do an attach, it's automatically going to attach the selected disk. If this were not the selected disk, or if we had not just created it, would not be selected, then we would have to use the select command to actually select that disk. So we've successfully attached the disk. Now we should be able to go back into our installation, do a refresh, and then that new disk should come up. And you see it does. We have a disk 3, 39.1 gigabytes. It does say that there's a warning that the disk cannot be used to make sure the disk controller is enabled in the BIOS, but we can safely ignore that. And I can go ahead and go to drive options and create a partition if I wanted to, or I can just select next and it will create the partition for me and go ahead and install on that disk. Now, the process that we're going through now is the actual Windows install. This will take, depending on the hardware and stuff, it could take another 20 minutes. But I'm just going to fast forward and zoom to the parts that we actually have to enter some data in. We are not booting from CD. We're just going to let it boot right to the hard drive. Setting up registry settings, starting services, completing installation. We're about 22 minutes through the setup. We do a final boot. Again, we're not going to boot to CD, and we have our menu. Notice on the boot, the menu has Windows Server 2008 R2. That's the default menu that the server will use. Preparing computer for first use. And finally, we get to the point where we have to enter our password. The password is successfully entered. I'm going to preparing the desktop. Getting down to the wire at this point. And finally, we have our desktop. Just to show a couple more things while we're in here, let's go ahead and take a look in the command prompt, and at the same time I'm going to go ahead and open up Disk Manager, and we'll take a look around. Take a look at the C drive, and you'll see that it just has the installed folders of this installation. If we look at the D drive, that's where our actual VHD folder is. So depending on which machine you're booting to will depend on what your file structure looks like. Your boot drive will always be the C drive. Let's go ahead and take a look at Server Manager and the disk management and see how it looks in there. First thing you'll notice is the disk 2, the blue icon, that actually shows that it's a VHD file, not a physical file. The D drive is on disk 1, and that is your physical host drive. Let's take a look and see what it looks like in my computer. The thing that I want to point out here is that the D drive shows that it has 67.6 gigabytes of space, and only 5.9 gigabytes are free. That is because on the C drive is 39 gig, and since the D drive is the host for the C drive, that 39 gig is assumed used on the host drive, which means you cannot have, say, a 300 gig partition in a boot to VHD if you physically have less than 300 gig available, because it would never be at a boot. In fact, what it would do is it would blue screen whenever it tries to load the disk driver.